Hello, this is Harley. Welcome to the podcast. Today we have an interesting subject to discuss, and that is the global food crisis. Global food crisis is getting complex, but I think I want to focus in on the efforts that the environmental NGOs in this country, in the United States, as well as environmental forces worldwide, including governments, policy advocates who want to end agriculture. They want to end all food production. They want to synthesize our food by genetically altering microbes to be able to ferment proteins. And this is to replace all of our food. It's to replace all grains. It's to replace all protein production in the form of livestock production, meat production, no eating meat whatsoever. To these policymakers and these environmental forces worldwide, livestock production and meat processing emits all of these gases, these climate gases, primarily methane and carbon. What they want to do is sink carbon into the soil, keep it there. That means no manipulation of the soil whatsoever, no growing crops, no grazing livestock, nothing, no agriculture, no food and fiber production whatsoever on land. It sounds ludicrous, but then when you think about what their plan is to kick everybody off the land, have large conglomerates buy up the land, and then leave it alone, just let it become natural and have a set amount of, they measure how much carbon is in the earth and they want to keep it there and they want to keep monitoring that. And they also want to, what they call, increase biodiversity, which if you leave the land alone and you don't graze on grasslands and you don't log timber off the forest, everything goes away. Everything dies. It's going to die. It needs man's and woman's stewardship to be able to survive on the planet. We need our land. We need our forests. We need our grasslands. And we need livestock production to feed us. And we need to grow grain to feed us. Without that, economists worldwide, even some of these economists that are within this movement to end all agriculture, say that without agriculture today, there's no way that the earth can support 8.5 billion people. Only 2.5 billion. Well, where are the other 6 billion people supposed to go? What are the other 6 billion people supposed to eat? They're not. They're not to exist. That's the plan. Thankfully, this administration has taken us out of the Paris Climate Accords, and they've also taken us away from the UN effort on climate change, and they've also pulled us out of the World Economic Forum. This is something that has been going on under the wire for quite some time, and this administration recognizes we need agriculture. We need a viable economy. I don't think the prior administration was really concerned about that. But this administration has done some things to prop up agriculture. Our U.S. Department of Agriculture Secretary, she has done a great job, and we need to let her work. We need to keep going with this. We need to support her in her efforts to keep agriculture afloat and to keep our economy afloat. I think if we look at history, every big civilization who took power in their part of the world collapsed when their agriculture collapsed. If you can't feed the people for famine, whatever reason, you don't have a government. starving people react, and that's the end of it. That's the end of civilization. If people can't eat when they live in a city, they go someplace else where they can eat. It's just that simple. We've got this presentation, so I'm going to go into it now, and I'm going to give a synopsis the best I can. I've explained some things on the bullet points over there that actually isn't in the presentation. So after the presentation, we'll close, and I'll give a closing statement and try to wrap things up to bring some things into context if I can. So here we go. Enjoy. A briefing on food, land, and policy. The global food crisis. Litigation, land use, war, and drought. The pressures converging on the world's food producers. What this briefing is going to cover: a landmark Dutch legal petition against JBS N.V, the world's largest meat company. Precision fermentation backed by environmental groups and climate change foundations push to decouple protein from farmland and livestock. Precision fermentation is to completely remove any kind of agriculture from the food process. This is all synthetic food. And next, Nigeria's food crisis and the legacy of import-reliant aid policy. Grazing, rewilding, and the argument over how grasslands stay alive. War, fertilizer, and drought, the shocks now hitting the global supply. And a note there, an attack on global food processors is also an attack on global food producers, family ranchers, farms, and pastoralists. So, yeah, for homesteaders who have small farms and just want to raise a few livestock, have a vegetable farm or any farm, cattle ranching, it covers the entire agricultural sector. Part 1, A New Frontier in Climate Litigation. Greenpeace petitions a Dutch court against JBS, the meat processor. Greenpeace Netherlands filed a legal petition to force the world's largest meat company to disclose environmental, climate, and human rights data on its $6 billion global expansion, including a $2.5 billion investment in new industrial meat plants in Nigeria. Very compelling disclosure. JBS has ignored a formal demand letter from Greenpeace, and they are using Dutch evidence law to compel internal records before a full lawsuit. Hidden impacts, documents sought on greenhouse gas emissions, supply chain controls, land use change, and ecosystem damage. Broken pledges. JBS scrapped its net zero by 2040 pledge, its deforestation target, and indigenous land protections. I think that it was, for them, they found out it was just unreasonable. It just was going to hit their bottom line too hard. There's just no way that they could live up to that. So, as any company would, they're going to try to keep alive. They're going to try to keep their bottom line where it can be. The local livelihoods and land. One Nigerian state has pledged 3 million acres towards the project. Nigeria wants food security and jobs, not U.S. aid. Nigeria is after food sovereignty and food security, and they lost their U.S. aid. They've got to do something. They have to feed the people, and this investment by JBS is a big thing for Nigeria and other countries in Africa as far as that's concerned, because if Nigeria becomes healthy and they have, they're able to export to neighboring companies, then they're going to help the entire continent of Africa out. All those countries are in need of food. There's top 3 there's a lot of people starving, and Africa's trying to become autonomous. So, next slide. Why Amsterdam changes the legal map. A Dutch corporate entity JBS moved its headquarters to Amsterdam, which may subject it to European and Dutch duty of care rules, requiring companies to proactively manage global operations to protect human rights and avoid climate harm. I know they were trying to list with the New York Stock Exchange. That was one of the reasons behind the move. Obviously, the owners, the brothers who own the company, are trying to get their stock share higher so that they'll actually have more ownership in the company than currently. A precursor, not the lawsuit. Greenpeace calls the transparency petition a necessary precursor to formal litigation, potentially the world's first major climate and nature lawsuit aimed at industrial livestock. It sounds to me like their court rules are a little bit different than they are in the United States. What we have is a discovery phase in a lawsuit where both parties get together and they disclose all evidence regarding the case. And then there are discovery requests from each attorney for each party. And then what they do is they go back and forth on this discovery phase, which may lead into a settlement without really getting into court sessions and litigation. But the European Union and Dutch courts obviously take a little bit different path to a settlement. So if they're successful, a major global precedent for the whole agricultural sector. The Dutch bet on precision fermentation. The Netherlands, where the court case is taking place, is the world's second largest exporter of agricultural food products and a European leader in vertical farming, hydroponics, and precision fermentation, which is programmed microbes producing animal-free proteins, dairy, eggs, enzymes, and fats without traditional agriculture. Regulatory milestones. First EU country to permit public taste tests of microbe fermented foods under strict safety codes. Infrastructure. An open access biotechnology fermentation factory pre-pilot lab in Ede helps firm scale microbial brewing. Industrial partnerships. Dutch dairy and cheese giants investing in fermented dairy and casein components. Local innovation. Amsterdam startups such as Farmless and Vivici build air-based and animal-identical protein systems. Part 2, Nigeria, Aid, and a Codependency. What U.S. aid actually is. 1961, created under the Foreign Assistance Act as the lead U.S. civilian agency for soft power in the form of humanitarian and development aid. What is funded? Emergency food relief and nutrition, global health, agriculture and market development, water, education, and governance. Scale and reach. In fiscal year 2024, USAID managed more than $35 billion with missions in over 60 countries and active programs in roughly 130 countries. What is funded? Emergency food relief and nutrition, global health, agriculture and market development, water, education, and governance. It was wound down in 2025 by the Trump administration. On July 1st, 2025, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, announced USAID would cease implementing foreign assistance. Surviving programs moved to the State Department. What Nigeria received from 2020 to 2025, $876 million in U.S. assistance to Nigeria in 2024 alone, the third largest total in Africa behind the Congo and Ethiopia. Therapeutic foods. Nigeria is a listed recipient of RUTF and RUSF, A 2025 U.S. package of 39 million covered 1,209 of stock plus 11,285 metric tons of new production across 13 countries. In-kind commodities. Food for Peace Title II ships U.S. grown food, sorghum, wheat, vegetable oil, and fortified blends, nearly 100% U.S. procured with U.S. flag shipping. Seeds and Know-How Feed the Future Extension Services, 16.8 million over 5 years, reached 2,021,468 farmers in 7 states of Africa with inputs for maize, rice, cowpea, and soybean. And small notes down there, critics of large-scale international aid argue that importing heavily subsidized agricultural goods or distributing foreign food commodities can inadvertently distort local markets. When cheap farm-backed food supplies flood a market, local pastoralists and farmers, ranchers, sometimes struggle to compete on price, leading to accusations that foreign aid suppresses independent local production in favor of dependency. Well, what has filled the gap since then? $200 million set aside Nigeria's 2025 budget to offset the U.S. aid freeze, a fraction of what was withdrawn. Abuja's own push, the leaders of Nigeria, a strategic grain reserve releases dry season farming and a $3.15 billion investment target with across cassava, maize, tomato, dairy, and fisheries. Development banks, a $550 million World Bank concessional agricultural loan, a $200 million AFDB loan for the Agro Pocket Scheme, and a $510 million agro-industrial processing zone in Kaduna. Relief did not recover completely. WFP suspended emergency food and nutrition aid for 1.3 million people in the northeast part of Nigeria. In July 2025, UNICEF's Nigeria appeal ran 67% short. The roots of Nigeria's food crisis, $900 million that went to Nigeria in 2024 across decades of programs that included agriculture, had an impact on local farmers. Prioritizing imports may have undermined domestic farmers and traditional practices, leaving them unable to compete. Import reliance. Critics argue U.S. aid policy encouraged dependence on imported food instead of building local production, weakening food security. A shared failure. Critics say the crisis was not created by USAID's 2025 exit, but by a codependency built by both the Nigerian government and USAID program partners. Part 3, Grazing, Rewilding, and the Grasslands. Why grazing keeps grasslands alive. Grasslands cover 2/3 of the earth and evolve with heavy grazing and trampling. Remove large herbivores and the grasslands degrade. Regenerative grazing uses livestock to mimic the now absent wild grazers. And for the things that grazing does to the land is nutrient cycling. Dung and urine rapidly return vital nutrients to the soil. And then we have soil aeration. Hooves break hard soil crust so air and water penetrate deeply. Plant vigor. Holistic managed grazing allows grasses to grow deeper, roots to survive drought. If you want to learn more about holistic managed grazing, go to Alan Savory's. He has so many numerous podcasts that he's been a guest on so many different podcasts by so many different channels. And also He has his Savory Institute and their Savory Institute, which are units set up to train local farmers and ranchers and government entities throughout the world, including the U.S. I believe there's one in Montana and one in New Mexico that I personally know about. And the next thing is litter breakdown. Digestion breaks down old plant material that would otherwise choke new growth. And a little footnote about Alan Savory's holistic managed grazing. It depends on predator-prey dynamics that keeps herds moving, mimicking rotational grazing, and on preventing woody encroachment where grasslands turn into dense, water-depleting scrubland. Wild herds cannot replace domestic livestock. What was is not now. 60% of all mammal biomass on Earth is domestic livestock. Only 4% is wild land mammals, heavily depleted or fenced out of historic ranges. Livestock are often the only tool left at the scale required to maintain vast open rangelands. Holistic management teaches ranchers to copy wild herds, bunching animals tightly, moving them rapidly, then resting the land for months so that native grasses rebuild deep roots. Just to expound on that a little bit, Alan Savory has what he calls a brittleness scale, and that determines how many cattle, what areas are grazed and how they're grazed and how long they stay, how they're bunched up and how they move. What rewilding actually is: 1,400 hectares of formal arable and dairy farmland at Knepp in Sussex, Europe's flagship rewilding project, began in 2000. Where the land comes from: marginal and abandoned farmland across Europe, plus arable and grazing ground bought or converted by trusts, charities, investors. The core idea: ecological restoration that minimizes human disturbance and lets natural processes run. Free-roaming herbivores, scrub, wetland, and returning predators shape the land. The scale of the ambition: campaigns such as Half Earth call for setting aside half of the planet's land and sea for nature, a target that would reshape working landscapes. And it might reshape working landscapes, but this is directly tied into available food production. And I don't think that correlation is really being made accurately. Next slide: turning farmland into a traded asset. February 2024, England's biodiversity net gain rules took effect, obliging developers to buy measurable nature units from landowners. Biodiversity credits: an EU pilot is testing tradable nature credits with an agreed scientific metric, while groups such as the Wallachia Trust design a standard biodiversity unit. Carbon credits: land can earn per ton of carbon sequestered on the voluntary market, where high-quality credit prices hit record levels in the late 2025 as buyers demanded verified removals. The producer's objection: farm groups argue restoration mandates and credit schemes turn food-producing land into offset inventory sold to distant buyers. EU nature restoration rules drew mass protest. What an acre actually pays: $3 to $20 per acre per year is the typical range farmers and ranchers earn from soil carbon credit programs. What cattle return: USDA put cow-calf net return above operating costs near $439 per cow in 2024, CattleFax members averaged 2,246. Calf revenue per head in 2025 against $780 in cash cow costs. Why credits pay so little? Rangeland stores carbon slowly, and average voluntary credit prices fell to roughly $4.80 a ton in 2024. Only premium directly sampled soil credits fetched $25 to $50. The strings attached. Credit contracts run for years with sampling, verification, and permanence obligations, while set-aside schemes such as CRP, that is Conservation Reserve Program, pay rent only once land leaves production. American Prairie, the Montana version. 3.2 million acres is the target ecosystem. American Prairie has been assembling in northeast Montana since 2001. Where it stands, about 600,000 acres under management as of September 2025, roughly 167,000 deeded and 437,000 leased public acres. How the model works: the nonprofit buys private ranches from willing sellers, then inherits the state and federal grazing leases tied to that deeded ground. Cattle are out, bison are in. Purchased ranches convert from cattle to free-roaming bison. The BLM revoked permits on about 63,000 acres in January 2026. Brokering biodiversity credits at Fort Peck. 800 plus buffalo graze 33,000 acres at Fort Peck, the herd the new credit program is built around. Defenders of Wildlife's role: a longtime Fort Peck and American Prairie partner, Defenders of Wildlife manages the program, quantifying the grassland benefit of bison and packaging it as credits for buyers. The Endless Prairie Buffalo Project, launched October 2025 by the Fort Peck tribes with Defenders of Wildlife and partners, the first tribal biodiversity credit pilot in the U.S. What the credits fund: proceeds fund more grassland for the tribal herd, turning habitat itself into a sellable, internationally tradable asset. How many cattle are being displaced? 20,000 to 24,000 cow-calf pairs is the grazing capacity already taken out of cattle production on the roughly 600,000 acres American Prairie manages today. If the full vision is built, excluding the federal refuge, the target leaves roughly 1.8 to 2.1 million grazing acres in play, an illustrative 60,000 to 85,000 cow-calf pairs. The arithmetic: a northeast Montana range typically carries one cow-calf pair per 25 to 30 acres, so every 100,000 acres converted removes 3,300 to 4,000 cow-calf pairs. Why ranchers object: deeded purchases carry attached public leases, so buying one ranch pulls several times its acreage out of grazing and shrinks the total cattle base. Large-scale predators. Grizzlies and wolves at the ranch gate. The presence of large carnivores are a second direct pressure on the same rangelands. Herds become stressed and lose weight, which can be devastating for smaller operations. The West and Northern Rockies. The vast majority of wolf populations live in states like Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Arizona, where over 8 million cattle are produced. In these areas, wolf packs often target calves. A lost calf worth around $1,250, can be a considerable financial loss for a smaller operation. Indirect costs like herd stress, weight loss, and reduced conception are harder to count, but the loss can be substantial. Protection, delisting, and the policy fight. Federal protection. Near as I can tell, wolves were listed under the Endangered Species Act in 1974. A 2020 delisting rule was vacated by a federal court in 2022, restoring protections across much of the lower 48. Delisting push. Western lawmakers continue to press bills to delist gray wolves and greater Yellowstone grizzlies, arguing both populations have recovered. State management. Interior has moved to shift grizzly management toward the states, a change supporters call a recovery success and critics call a risk. And a footnote there is coexistence is being tested on the ground. Montana ranchers on the 55,000-acre West Fork allotment are managing herds around grizzly corridors with conservation group backing, and USDA has directed more than $22 million to 5 western states for carnivore conflict work. Where management is restricted rather than supported, ranchers argue the cost falls on them and grazing capacity quietly slips away. America's forfeited grazing capacity. Too many public land allotments have been left underused, mismanaged, or effectively sidelined. Mismanaged grazing lands are often lost to neglect, degradation, and desertification. Drought hastens rangeland decline, but damage deepens when herbivores are removed and water policy favors urban growth. Proposals to raise grazing fees or litigate grazing on public lands add pressure to ranchers already managing thin margins. A USDA DOI Memorandum of Understanding and the proposed grazing rule offer a practical path back toward balance. The MOU, and the grazing rule is designed to get more additional grazing leases on National Forest Service lands and also other public lands besides the attached allotments to ranchers. Currently, a USDA DOI Memorandum of Understanding and the proposed grazing rule offer a practical path back toward balance. Stronger fire prevention policy is needed before more grasslands and forests are lost. Part 4, 2 wars, 1 food system. 2 conflicts add to fertilizer squeeze. Both wars have restricted the supply routes that carry fertilizer and grain, raising input costs across the food system and deepening food security risk in import-dependent countries. Ukraine exports curtailed from a major producing region, cutting the availability of both grains and fertilizers. Reduced supply of essential fertilizers has lifted the price of agricultural inputs worldwide. Iran closure of the Strait of Hormuz has suspected roughly 30% of Gulf fertilizer exports. Urea prices have roughly doubled since February 2026, raising the cost of every planted acre. Comparing the 2 shocks, the 2 conflicts disrupt the same food system in different places, one at the farm and the export terminal, the other at the fertilizer plant and the shipping lane. Ukraine war, export curtailments of grains and fertilizers reduce availability and push prices up, raising production costs and risking shortages in importing countries. Iran war, closure of the Strait of Hormuz suspends about 30% of Gulf exports and has doubled urea prices, hitting import-dependent countries hardest. Who absorbs it? Africa and South Asia carry the most exposure. Higher input costs there translate quickly into reduced fertilizer use and lower crop yields. Both conflicts leave global food systems in a precarious position. The case for resilience in agricultural supply chains has never been sharper. Iran, how conflict reached the farm. Surging fertilizer costs, blockades in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea rerouted cargo, raising freight costs and agricultural input prices. Many crop producers blew past normal operating budgets by tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some have shifted away from high input crops like corn towards soybeans. Escalating fuel and energy. Higher oil prices lifted diesel costs and fuel expenses for agricultural aviation operators. Tractors, harvesters, and irrigation systems became more expensive to run every single day. Financial pressure. Surveys show producers expect lower net farm income and higher break-even costs for the production year. Narrowed farm margins are gradually pushing grocery prices up for consumers. Ukraine, the breadbasket under siege. Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022 struck one of the world's largest suppliers of wheat, corn, and sunflower oil, and the disruption has not ended. The Black Sea corridor carries over 90% of Ukraine's agricultural exports each season. Rail handles only 7 to 8%. Strikes on Odessa area ports and energy infrastructure halted vessel traffic for stretches of the peak summer harvest. Marine war risk insurance premiums doubled, and some underwriters left the market altogether. Ukraine's agriculture ministry puts direct sector losses at 1.5 to 3 billion for the year. Supply tightening fast. With limited spare capacity at alternative ports, buyers are sourcing wheat elsewhere, a quick tightening of global supply that analysts do not expect to ease soon. Where the shock lands hardest. Before the invasion, more than half of the wheat imported by 15 African countries came from Ukraine and Russia, over 70% for Egypt, Sudan, Eritrea, Benin, Djibouti, and Tanzania. From 2022 to 2024, the number of people going hungry on the continent rose sharply. A perfect storm. The FAO attributes the 2020-2024 surge in food prices to a combination of pandemic inflation, the war in Ukraine, restricting commodity movement, and climate shocks. Fertilizer as leverage. Russia has suspended ammonium nitrate export licenses to protect its own planting season, with Chinese curbs alongside. Some fertilizer prices rose as much as 40%. Grain as geopolitics. Analysts argue Russian grain shipments to Africa serve influence as much as hunger relief, while Ukraine's grain diplomacy follows a different logic. Footnote there. Two wars now sit on the same supply chain, one raising the cost of every input, the other cutting off the grain itself. Drought at home becomes hunger abroad. Severe drought across major U.S. regions shrinks harvests of corn, wheat, soybeans, and livestock feed. Because the U.S. is a leading exporter, domestic shortfalls cut world supply, spike export prices, and worsen hunger in import-dependent countries. Feed shortages. Over 50% of U.S. cattle inventory and much hay and grazing acreage is drought hit. Ranchers struggle to keep their herds. Herd liquidation. Reducing herd size creates a short-term beef supply, then a multi-year global meat and dairy deficit as herds rebuild. Thin global buffers. Lower U.S. yields compound crop losses in Europe and Asia, drawing down the world's available food supply. The elephant in the room. Supply shocks are raising grocery prices and commodity volatility, while higher costs shrink the reach of humanitarian food aid. The Greenpeace legal action against JBS N.V. is the first major case of its kind against global food production. It may not collapse the food supply, but it could set a powerful, dangerous precedent and add pressure to a system already under severe strain. This could be a tough winter. We're just going to have to see what the harvest is this fall. So that's coming up the next few months. I think what I'm going to do is prepare for this winter. Just get items, food items, that is, canned goods and that kind of thing, long-term storage items, mostly, just to, in case there is a shortage on something, we'll at least have it. You know, rice and beans, that kind of thing, staples, and take it from there, I guess. People are scared, I'll say that. I'm not. I don't really see what good it's going to do to really worry about it. It's just a matter of taking some action, just being positive about it and try to survive it and be comfortable. So I don't think anybody should be hoarding. I'd say that if you're going to just stock up, gradually stock up on your grocery bill every month, just get maybe a little bit more long-term food items than you normally would. Hoarding just doesn't do any good, even if all of a sudden they announce there is a big shortage on a certain item. Look what happened to toilet paper during the pandemic. It was just people were panicking, and it caused a further disruption when you hoard. I'm going to say, everybody, please don't hoard. Just take it calm, plan, do some proactive things to survive the winter. And that's just going to be, maybe think about getting some seeds. We're getting some seeds. We're looking ahead to next spring. I really didn't want to have another large garden, but looks like I've been outvoted. So we're going to have that. I think get some chickens, get a few laying hens for eggs. And might even think about getting some meat birds. I'd get like 25 at a time. That's what I've done, and that's about all I really process is 25 birds at a time. That's about it for a year for me. And they grow quick if you get the right kind of meat bird. You can have them. You can feed them for about 8-9 weeks, and you're going to have some really big chickens. And but it's just a matter of taking the time to process the birds, stick them in the freezer. That, and if you don't have now, what I would think about, if you have the land where you can graze a few animals, is to get a milk cow. If you have a large family, 2. And I'd get a Guernsey, if you're going to get 2 cows, I think I'd get a Guernsey, and the other one would be either a Holstein or a Jersey. So I think those are 2 really good cows. I don't recommend a brown Swiss. I milked a brown Swiss by hand. We had one once when I was a youngster, and I had a heck of a time. That cow was so big. Of course, she was crossed with Charolais. Those are big cows. A Charolais is a big cow. And the kickers wouldn't even fit on that cow, but she used to kick me too. And it was tough. I'd dump milk. She kicked the bucket out from under me all the time. It was just frustrating. But Guernseys are mellow, and the milk is just fantastic. You'll get kind of a yellowish, almost orange colored cream on it. And it just a lot of cream coming out of a Guernsey. You separate that cream out and just crank out your own butter. It's not that hard. You just get an old paddle wheel type butter churn and just crank it up. Make your own butter. Give yourself some. Make yourself some ice cream. Some good vanilla ice cream from that. It's just awesome. But that's kind of what I would do. And then if you don't want to raise a beef cow, I'd say just get with the neighbors. And most small towns, agricultural towns in the Midwest and the West, they have a locker plant. So you can go in there and people bring their cattle all the time, and they bring their deer and their elk in there too, and pronghorn, whatever they're hunting, get those processed. Just get with a neighbor and split a hog or something like that. I go split a half of beef, get a quarter beef, and stick it in the freezer. Get a couple of freezers, and that way you'll have plenty of meat around. I mean, it's the best stuff going anyway. You can't get any better than that. And then of the vegetables, I think what I would recommend is you can seed out your tomato plants. Around here, for some reason, it's hard to get the tomato plants you want. I don't know why that's the case, but I've always had good luck with beefsteak. I love those beefsteak tomatoes. They're just really big, and you slice them up kind of thin, put them on hamburgers. They'll fit on a hamburger one slice. It's nice. And they make great, cut them up for salads, whatever you want to do with them, can them. They just really all around great tomatoes, those beefsteak variety. There's different varieties they call, but the basic variety is the beefsteak tomato plant. For lettuce is a big thing right now. And I've never liked iceberg lettuce. I just thought it was a waste, really, a waste of water, if you will. But I always had good luck with the black-seeded Simpson. And you put that black-seeded Simpson, it's leaf lettuce. The leaves, it grows. You can just keep cutting it, and it just keeps growing all summer long. So it's black-seeded Simpson, and you can't go wrong there. And yeah, just great lettuce for hamburgers, whatever, salads, whatever you want to do with it. It's just good stuff. And there's a little bit more nutrients in it too, and it just tastes fantastic. Yeah, I'd stay away from that iceberg lettuce stuff. That's all store stuff. But and if you can get some potatoes going, it's kind of hard to get anything going unless you can get a hold of the seed potatoes that you cut up, get an eye or two on a quarter and shove them in the ground. You can keep them in the wintertime, keep them cool and dark, and they'll actually get some sprouts on them during the wintertime, but you can do that. Just save some from your crop in the fall. But for potatoes, I just pretty much went with Yukon Golds. You just can't beat them. Very high nutrient, and they're kind of a yellowish potato, but they make great baked potatoes, mashed potatoes. Anyway, you want to eat a potato, they're just fantastic, and they taste really good. And nutrient level can't beat them. So yeah. Anyway, that's what I've done. Pretty much as spring comes along, I'll probably dive into this stuff a little bit deeper on different varieties and what kind of luck there is with them and how to grow them, how to get big. I had so many turnips one time. I had more turnips than I could do anything with. And then you have your beets, and you have, I got to have my jalapenos. For peppers, I get habaneros and jalapenos. That's pretty much it there. Of course, the green peppers, got to have those for salads. And then various types of onions. There's some types of onions that they just grow really well, and they get really, really large. And they're kind of a little bit more on the sweet side. They're not, I don't know, smelly, if you will. And they're good onions. They really taste well. So there's a couple of varieties. But I guess we'll have to look forward to gardening here next spring, see where that gets us. And of course, you can't go wrong with having a goat. I don't particularly care for goats. That comes from when I was growing up, and one of my first cars as a teenager. I go out there and I'd change, do some maintenance on my car. So I'd have the hood open. I'd come in the house to get a drink, go back out, and Billy Goat is up there with his front legs, his hind legs. Sometimes they dance on the hood of the car, but I've had them, where they've got their front legs in the engine compartment and they're ripping the spark plug wires out of the engine. And that's the kind of experience I have with goats. So goats and I never really got along that good, is what I'm trying to say. But each to their own. If you like goats, go for it. They got some great milk and great meat, and you can't go wrong with what you feed them. But I guess about all we can do is just ride out this storm. Homesteaders, if you've got any kind of space to have a garden, put one in, I would say. And if you have room to raise animals, like I said, if you got a little bit of grazing, get some animals. Do what you can in that regard. That's why we live out here, is so we can have natural food, grow our own food. Maybe the neighbors do, just buy meat and buy vegetables from them. Now, we've got some good farmers markets around here too, where people, they have large gardens, some of them, and they just have more than they can. There's leftovers, and just go in there and get the leftovers. I think now is the time to start thinking about canning too. I'd say the way things are going right now, I'd be canning as much as I could, get as many, just can everything, can meat, vegetables, besides pickles, and get it all canned up. It's going to take a lot of time, but hey, get the family together, have a little bit of gathering going there, feed everybody well, and just have some canning parties. And everybody share into it. Of course, it's kind of nice to get everybody over there kind of working the garden too. But if you have the family to do it, about all we can do is ride it out. I just hope we get some snowpack this fall, this winter, and it hangs around until spring. That's what gives us most of our water, in the West. So we can pray for that, pray for rain. I just can't seem to get any rain. Supposedly they say, well, with that super El Nino, we're gonna have all kinds of this great wet monsoon. I don't know where it's at. It's all around me. We've had a lot of lightning and a lot of virga. I guess you call it. Virga is where the rain never hits the ground. You can see it coming down in places, but it never makes it to the ground. So I guess it's like there's a dome over my place. I don't know what it is. And I just can't seem to get the rain. We'll get a few drops and it'll land just like that. We'll get a small storm. It'll come in. We'll get some lightning bolts coming down. Might get a little bit of wind. A few raindrops and boom, it's gone. So I don't know. I guess there's still some time left in this year's monsoon, but it hasn't been good yet. I hear from some of the ranchers out there that the elk are skin and bones and the deer haven't been doing that good. We've had problems with pronghorn too, so they can't seem to do very good in this drought. We're losing numbers of pronghorn all over the place. It's a problem, but that's what we got to look forward to this fall. So I don't know I don't have a tag. I can't draw a tag. In New Mexico, the residents aren't, should I say, encouraged. Yeah, in New Mexico, I'd like to have an elk in the freezer and a deer and a pronghorn. I'd like to go out and hunt them, and the family loves the meat, especially pronghorn. But in New Mexico, residents don't seem to be able to hunt. They discourage residents from hunting. They want to they don't want very much hunting going on here because of state government and the color they are. But so not much hunting goes on, and the hunting that does go on is they get the non-residents in here who pay a lot of money to hunt. And of course, that leaves the residents out. We can't get the tags. There's so few tags in the public draw for residents, it's not even worth putting in the draw anymore. And a lot of people just quit and give up. You know, if you're a landowner, you can get a hold of some tags. They give landowners elk and deer and pronghorn, do what they want with them, sell it to the highest bidder or whatever. But if you don't have enough land to be able to qualify for those landowner tags, you're just kind of out of luck. I mean, I can look through my window and see the pronghorn grazing, and I can't hunt them. And same way with the elk. I mean, in the morning, if I got to run into town, you know, there might be 100 elk in the road eating grass in the ditches alongside the road there, and I got to honk my horn to get them out of the way, but I can't hunt them. I live about 5 miles as the crow flies from a main trailhead to a wilderness area. Of course, the wilderness area is just let it go. You know, it's a natural environment. All it is a bunch of weeds. Nothing's growing there, no trees, nothing. You get a few shrubs going. You're growing up in there, taking up water is all they do. It's just a big dust bowl. Everything's oxidating. I don't even think there's anything living there except snakes. But that's the way it is, you know. Governance at its worst. This is about the best way I can put it. And that seems to be happening too much in the West these days, where, you know, the state fish and game departments, or at least that's what they used to call them. Now everybody's on this hype where it's the Department of Wildlife. We have to take care of the endangered species. Around here, the way things are going is the farmers and the ranchers are the only endangered species. And that includes livestock. There's more endangered species of livestock out here than there is wild species. But yeah, we have to lose our firewood to the spotted owl. Yeah, the spotted owl is important, but we can't heat our homes with wood. And it happens to be the primary source of heat around the mountains in the West is firewood. But oh no, we don't want to burn all that carbon up. No. Well, there's not that many people out here, so I would imagine that in the cities, in the big cities, 5 blocks of gridlock traffic probably puts more carbon into the air than the entire country folk in some of these states do burning wood, you know. I'm sure that happens. But that's what we've had to look forward to. If you want to eat and you like agriculture and you want to eat good steaks and you want to eat good vegetables and you want to raise your family with some healthy food, there's really only one way to vote this fall. I'll just say that. I mean, that's just the way it is. So why not just put it out there? And I'll leave it at that. Till next time, have a great day and thanks for listening.